Sou muito obrigado. Eu vou falar em inglês, como todos aqui, mas sou da Guiné, então queria só cumprimentar em português. Essa é a primeira vez que eu participo nessa edição. Muito bem organizado e gostaria de agradecer os organizadores por me terem convidado. I think this is a keynote speaker. It's not a long discourse, and I think the panel will do certainly more justice to the issue, but also because many things has been mapped out. But what's important, I think, in this kind of event is to look what's the end goal, what's the takeaway. And I think the very positive aspect of this event is that you had the diaspora, the Portuguese diaspora, very dynamic, quite powerful globally, and to see how to use it as a vehicle to convey a set of message. And I think this is what really needs to be the driver of this event, this yearly event, because you have a very powerful, probably very discreet, but very powerful diaspora that can be used. But it's important to have the context. And even if you have to insert the transportation issue, it's good to insert it into the context. And the context now, you simply cannot ignore all the issue of the architecture, the global architecture. My mom used to say always, when people say it's not about the money, believe me, it's about money. And basically, we need resources to deal with climate change. You need resources for transportation. You need resources for food, energy. And Africa is lacking capital. We have assets. We are very Africa asset-rich, but they are not liquid. We are not a population that I think safe compared to the Asian, if you look at the statistic. But we are very rich in assets. The challenge is now how we turn those assets. And that's why you have all the set of public policies. But I wanted to go back to the issue of the financial architecture because I think we need to use the diaspora, including the Portuguese diaspora, in this process of the renewal or the review of the financial architecture, the global financial architecture. Because it's very unfair. I spent more than 15-something years in the Bretton Woods institution, and I've seen how the Bretton Woods institution has been structured to serve the post-war reality. The tools that you have are also to serve the post-war reality. And I think we need to kind of do a global resetting or to reboot this. And I think, one very simple thing that can illustrate that. You all know that Keynes, when the Bretton Woods institution was being designed, insisted on the fact that we needed to have a kind of a global currency that could help inject resources for recovery. Because he knew that at some point you need not to take the market only, but to use some resources that the state can also bring in a kind of a cooperative like the IMF, and then inject those resources for reconstruction. There was debate because there are some people who wanted the market to play that role. And I think we see now with the need for global public good, whether it's on vaccine, whether it's on things like environment, climate, you need different set of money. You cannot just rely on the market and the financial sector in the private sector. I just wanted to set the scene on that because I think it's very important. Because the debate that has been put into place for many years was, okay, we bring the private sector, we'll solve it, the financial market will solve it. That's good, but I think because of the pursuit of dealing with the global public goods, we need to bring some money from the public sector together at the multilateral level, and I wanted to set the thing. But I wanted to give you some numbers, because if you don't have a sense of proportion, you will not understand the volume of resources that we need in Africa to deal with the issue of transportation and infrastructure. Just give you an example of how much West Germany spent on the yearly base for upgrade of East Germany. Just give me a numbers, how much you think that they were spending every year in the process of reunification. Any suggestion, Mr. Reyes? How much? 5 billion. Okay. West Germany was spending $150 billion every year for the process of unification over 10 years in a very predictable manner. So if a country like East Germany needed that amount of money, imagine African continent with 16 landlocked countries. We have the biggest number of landlocked countries. And if you put aside the Mercator syndrome, you know that the map that Google shows has nothing to do with the reality and the size of the continent and how much you will need to upgrade the continent in terms of investment. The World Bank said that I think just in terms of infrastructure, Africa needs $95 billion every year for infrastructure. I normally laugh when I hear that. I say, how can you think that $95 billion will do the trick if in East Germany you spend $150 billion a year? And by the way, after 10 years, the East Germans were not so happy. They were still dwelling with happiness compared to the West Germany. So I think, as my mom will say, when people say it's not about money, it's about our money. And I think we need to bring that aspect, because otherwise the African themselves will not change the mindset and start thinking of, fine, we'll get the resources from the international community, but there's a lot of things we need to do internally on domestic resource mobilization, because the amount of money we need to upgrade our infrastructure, and because our cities are growing so fast, never in the history of humanity, any continent has faced the challenge of the growing city the way we're going to have it. So I think it's important to have the sense of proportion. And on that, the good news is that the European Union have mapped out quite well the alliance of infrastructure. And I think Mr. Laringinia was talking earlier. There have been a lot of effort. There is a task force that's been put in place that's mapped out the need in terms of infrastructure between Europe and Africa, what to do to accelerate the things. The issue is implementation. And I think another important role of a conference like this one is to identify a pipeline of projects, as you mentioned earlier this morning. I've been, in the last 10 years, focusing only on being venture builder, is to try to find companies, because we need to set up companies, need to set up projects. So if you look at, for example, how much you need for an average town, city in Africa, in terms of BRT, is, I think, bus rapid transfer, transit. This is the kind of a bus you have in town. I think cities like Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan, Lagos, Dakar, which other city? Accra will need bus rapid transit. On average, you need $150 million for each of the city, an average, but you need more. Those are the amounts. Many of this project has been designed. Dakar is implementing one, but many other countries need those. I think Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan is doing that. So you need money for that, and you cannot just wait for the classical PPP for that. I think there's a room, I think as Leslie was saying this morning, to recalibrate the capital structure of the multilateral institutions, to increase. I think if you do this reform they are talking about, and I think they will discuss that in October, if you do the reform to unlock that capital with the AAA that many of the multilateral bank has, you will free up something in the region of $200 billion for lending in the next 10 years. And with the $200 billion, you could do a lot. You could do a lot in terms of transportation. So I can go on and on the numbers, but I want to give you now the recommendations I'm proposing. I have basically 2 or 3. The first one is to create a corridor, 2 corridors. An air corridors that could come from Cape Verde to go up, down to Angola, and there are some examples. 15 years ago, I was involved in setting up an airline. I did the financial modeling and all the business plan with an old man who's still alive in Togo, and we work on setting up ASKY. Many of you haven't heard about ASKY. It's an African airline based in Togo, and we work on that for more than a year and something. And people were very skeptical, because they're saying, well, you want an airline? Why are you doing an airline? You need something. Let the others airline coming from Europe, they will take care of that. with perseverance, we put it in place. We went and brought shareholders, 2 banks, multilateral banks, the BOAD and the ECOWAS Bank. We went to see EcoBank, they put a little bit of money. And then we look at another player who could help us kind of fine-tune the operation. And you know what? We went to see Ethiopian Airlines. We spent 2-3 months with Ethiopian Airlines, 6 months with Ethiopian Airlines, and finally they agreed to join. Fast forward, after 15 years, it's the only profitable airline in Africa after Ethiopian Airlines. Last year, we made $30 million net income. So what concrete thing we could do is to bring other small countries to join this airline. My own country, Guinea-Bissau, is not a member. I have heard some of our people talking, okay, let's set up our own airline. We are less than 2 million people in Guinea-Bissau. What kind of airline do you want to set up with 2 million people? To go where? What's the ability to pay? And the same thing can be said with Gambia and others. So we can join those countries. It's totally different with the experience of EurAfrican, because Ethiopian Airlines is certainly one of the best airlines in the world. So that corridor, airline corridor, air corridor, can come from Cape Verde, bring a set of countries, go up to Angola. By the way, Askai will start in August, start flying to Angola. So now to go to Luanda, you don't need to go up to Germany or London and come down if you are based in Côte d'Ivoire. So that's kind of thing that will accelerate the trade between countries, because the cargo also will. So the first recommendation is an air corridor. It could be beefed up by bringing those countries to be members, upgrade some of the airports, and you will see the impact it's going to have on tourism. I was in Cape Verde last week. I was quite impressed by more than 10, 15 flights per day in Praia, and it will boost the tourism, but much needs to be done, because if something happens in terms of the crisis, a virus, and you can be sure that we will have another pandemic, the issue is when, maybe the tourism in Africa can compensate some of the issues that we had with the tourists coming from Europe during the pandemic, because you have a middle class in Africa who will be ready to go and spend time in Cape Verde, and it could be a way to balance that. The second recommendation would be a maritime corridor. Do you know that there's basically no cabotage in the whole Atlantic? When you have those shipping companies, such as Maersk and others, they like to do long routes. They will leave from maybe Durban and then they go all the way. They don't stop to the countries. They don't stop in Guinea-Bissau and others. The cabotage that could happen in West Africa, if you have a marine company, and one can set up the same model with Askai, to have a shipping company will do essentially cabotage and do door-to-door, it will increase the internal trade between countries. And that's the only solution for job creation. We should be focusing on job creation, and job creation will happen essentially by processing to move away from the colonial model of export of commodity and start processing things. But if you process things, you need also to use it for the domestic market. And shipping, as we know, is 95% of what carry the goods. But you don't have any cabotage in the whole Atlantic, and the same thing in the East Africa and in Indian Ocean. So this would be the recommendation of 2 concrete transactions. The business plan exists. The issue is to see who do we bring on board. By the way, if you do a marine corridor, a shipping corridor for cabotage, where will you train the people? Which country has the best people best school to train seafarers and captain of ships? It's Portugal. So you don't need to go to New York to do that. It could happen here in Portugal to train people, and then we have, a mini corridor coming for cabotage in West Africa. And finally, something that's very dear to me, and sorry I took a little bit too much on the key, is you cannot develop the whole transportation in a very dynamic way, the network of transportation across Africa, if you don't also pay attention, and we discussed that, about climate change and our assets. Do you know that in Africa alone, we have more than 6 million square kilometers of protected areas? This is protected areas that Africa has decided to give to the rest of the world is the equivalent of Australia, what we have protected. Even a small country like mine, 30% of Guinea-Bissau is protected. And this is probably one of the main barriers against climate change. But if the cities start growing, they will start erode those parks and protected areas. There's more than 4,000 parks and protected area in Africa. I want you to retain this number. It's huge. If you destroy this natural capital, the impact it's going to have on global warming, but even on water. Many people don't know that the main source of the water that pump the Nile up to Egypt come from Burundi, Rwanda, and Congo. So the protected areas have to be put also in a parallel track when you think about transportation, mobility, and the growth in the urban areas. And I think if you combine that, we have a formidable opportunity to deal with growth, but also protecting our ecosystem. And this has value, because I don't believe that if Africa continues to protect 6 million square kilometers, this has price. And the price has to be exactly what Mr. Laringina was saying earlier, the price of carbon. And this could be a very good tool, an important tool to provide additional resources to develop our infrastructure, and notably transport. I'm sorry I spoke a little bit passionately about this, but I needed to, I think, convey this message for you. Thank you.